Some thoughts on the death of Carrie Fisher. Now, if you're on my channel for the politics and philosophy, you may skip this, because this is, well, more about personal rambling I'm planning here. Carrie Fisher died just yesterday. She was known to the world almost solely as Princess Leia Organa in the Star Wars movies. Now, I have considered for a bit of a time if I should make a movie or any comment about the death of an actor, because if you follow my channel and know me somewhat, if you follow my channel and know me somewhat, you know that commenting on singers, dancers, artists, actors, and so forth, on their private doings and don't doings, usually isn't anything I'm commenting as. In part because the private lives of actors and public figures is usually of no interest to me. In this case, I'm making an exception because, as many Star Trek fans, I was heavily influenced by Star Trek. And I think following what the idea of being a public figure does to you is, I think, something worth reflecting on. Now, if you play any figure in movies that is particularly famous, iconic, or remembered, whether in movie or TV, it does something to you. Now, everyone who is an artist, and I consider acting as part of the arts as performance art, everyone who is an artist of any sort, whether he creates or plays music, sings, dances, acts in movie or theaters, writes books, stories, or like myself, paints paintings, or whatever the nature of your art is, it is always considerably more than just work. Art is that sort of work which you cannot do just like office work. Now, some people love their office work, or their being a teacher, or being anything in an area of work which is not connected to the arts, no doubt. And it can determine your life just the same. But you cannot do arts without passion. You can work as a teacher without passion, or a policeman without passion, or any office work without passion, and maybe nobody notices if you hide it well. But you cannot be a dancer, a singer, a painter, a writer, or performance artist like an actor without passion, without really being behind it. And in the reverse, as and if you grow hugely successful in something, it determines and defines your life in considerably larger proportions than doing anything else. For instance, if you take Mrs. Rowling, who wrote the Harry Potter novels, she's in a fortunate and at the same time tragic situation, because it is almost impossible for her to ever write anything greater than Harry Potter. So I'm not entirely sure how old she is. I think she's something in the 40s, approximately my age, I think. And she still has decades of life, God's wish, before her, and still she has already the apex of her art behind. And it is indescribably difficult to describe to someone not working in the artist sector how unbelievably much of a burden that can be. That you make a performance as an actor, or write a book as an author, or whatever the case may be, and you are so defined by it that you never get out of the shadow of it. I remember that Leonard Nimoy, who for a great length of decades portrayed the unbelievably iconic and famous character Mr. Spock, first wrote a biography called I Am Not Spock because he felt so overburdened by always being identified with Spock from Star Trek that he felt the necessity to distance himself. And I remember stories Leonard Nimoy told that he, which happened to many actors, was so overwhelmed by the character of Spock he played that his family at some point started to complain he was acting in real life like Mr. Spock. Like if you're acting, unlike if you are writing or painting, acting is a full body performance. You put all you are in it. It's not like painting a picture or making music or singing. Singing and making music is maybe closer because you can't fake emotions. And if you play the emotions of a musical piece, you soon and immediately get caught in the emotion. For instance, if you like a singer, whether you're singing pop songs or opera songs, the emotion of those musical pieces catch up with you and you're not faking them. They work through you. Now, you need these personal emotions as a writer or as a sculptor too, but being a performing artist like an actor, it has really the habit, and I've read about this very often, to take over the person if that person plays that character very often. Another example of this is Jeremy Brett, who in the 80s and 90s performed brilliantly in the Granada series of Sherlock Holmes and is, for me as a Holmes fan, still the embodiment of Sherlock Holmes. And he too had these two-sided phases. On the one time, feeling so much identified with Sherlock Holmes, like Sherlock Holmes was a person taking him over. Or the same, Mr. Spock was felt by Leonard Nimoy as a person to take him over. And I have only played in a few theatre plays in very small stages, a considerable time of years ago. But even then I understood the lure of becoming another character, because if you play this, people who never played in any, at least semi-professional way, not in your bathroom or something like that, really before audience in a set piece where you do something, it is difficult to describe that you really, in a very, yes, almost magical way, create a character, you create a being, and you're not pretending in a sense that a layman may think of it, but you really transform a part of yourself and awake a personality within you. And if that character is especially popular over a long period of time, it can be very difficult to emotionally and intellectually get out of it. If you look at William Shatner, for instance, I think it is very clear that, to a large part, Captain Kirk, the character he played and became famous with, has absorbed a little bit into him. And to a degree, it is, for a guy like William Shatner, probably playful, funny, cool, so he doesn't really mind, and Captain Kirk is not really a problematic character by any stretch of the meaning. Now, going back to Carrie Fisher and her playing Princess Leia, first off, I think she was one of the early powerful female fantasy figures, despite the fact that her bikini appearance in episode 6, Return of the Jedi, was probably the wet dream of many a young teenage boy at the time, she always displayed a strong, positive, deep character, and despite being an archetypal princess, the strength that this character had was something admirable and certainly in any way positive. Now, the problem of Carrie Fisher, as happened with many actors, not only in Star Wars, but in many similar movies, is that she was practically an unknown person before Star Wars. And without Star Wars, there was nothing of any significant meaning of roles she had gotten afterwards. I am not entirely sure. I didn't follow her career with any great observance, to be honest, but she never had anything like remotely significant roles, much unlike, for instance, Harrison Ford, who had quite a considerable career after playing Han Solo in Star Wars, in many roles of some significance. But most actors who play such iconic roles, who were unknown before, are usually often falling into a terrible hole of obscurity. And you see, if you act, it's not like an office job in the sense of earning money, because you earn money for that one role, but once it is gone, you are essentially again jobless. And of course, you have all those people reminding you of the glorious past, where you were Princess Leia, where you were Luke Skywalker, or whatever the case may be. And since that is finished, or in the case of Star Wars, was finished, it's like you were a really glorious person in the past, and there are always your fans who love you for that was 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. But your life is like stagnant in the sense that nothing moves on. And there is a whole lot of actors and musicians, especially people from the performing arts, who fall so deep in holes that they spend all their money and end in poverty. They're going through tremendous use of all sorts of drugs, alcohol, cocaine, and I don't know what not, just to compensate for this immense feeling of an emotional kick that it gives you to be famous and recognized. And as I said, even in my small way, I can remember how it was when about 20 years ago, after playing my small piece in a small theater role, how invigorating and enthusing it was to be recognized somewhere by some random stranger who loved the role you played in the theater play you participated, and waved at you and said, "Hey, XYZ, whatever the role is you played." That is really an unbelievable, invigorating and positive thing. I mean, I'm sure it can get on your nerves if you are really super famous, like someone like Leonardo DiCaprio, who probably can't move anywhere without being recognized. And I suppose people like Carrie Fisher or Mark Hamill from Star Wars, or the Star Trek actors, or people from such movie series and TV series really are under the same problem. So one thing that I may put out as an idea, I'm not sure it really is a valid idea, but it just came to my mind when I reflected about this, is maybe that is also in a point the problem with our politicians. Because for the longest time I've marveled why our politicians seem to very often in all the Western world and all the world outside the West just as well, at least where people are being held to democratic elections, why they seem to be so strange in their behavior, shall we say. Like saying one thing and doing another, like yearning for praise and all the emotional and characteristic deformations of the personality, and maybe there are similar psychological mechanics at work which really would need a more professional analysis than myself to contemplate about this. But it is a train of thought which I played in the last few hours while thinking of the many deaths, because as you may know, the death of Carrie Fisher is just the last of a series of many famous people in arts, in performing arts like music, industry, and acting, both TV and movie, which has hit us in 2016 and making 2016 kind of a really bad year. Now, there is two afterthoughts I have about this. The first thing is, maybe it is what many people who getting older like myself, I'm 45 now, were saying in the past too, but I kind of cannot shake the feeling that with the people dying now, we are losing a sort of iconic actors and singers. If I think of the great musicians and singers who died in 2016 and in the past, like someone like Prince or someone like David Bowie from the music industry, or many of the actors who died in the last year and in recent years, I just do not see that any musicians and actors who are now young and growing, with a very few exceptions, really have the caliber, the format, the depths, the iconic profundity to resemble them. Most of them are like dwarves, like midgets, compared to the past generations of actors, singers and musicians. In part because it is also because actors are no longer so willing to bind themselves to one type of role. Take one simple example. The case of the role of Mr. Spock, which was previously for a long time played by Leonard Nimoy, and they recast the original crew in a very positive way, in my personal opinion. But I think his name is Zachary Quinto, who now frequently played Mr. Spock in a few movies. His role is not that much, or his acting career is not that much dominated by being Mr. Spock. It's not that he plays his life to be Mr. Spock for the next 40 years. And he's playing all sorts of things, so he's not so much connected to Spock, even though he plays Spock, I think, positive. I like the way the new crew plays those new characters. But it's not like in the old times when, I don't know, take an example, an actor like John Wayne. I mean, John Wayne played many roles, but in a sense, he always played the same character. And that was true for many of the artists of old. So when you went into a new movie with John Wayne or Bette Davis or Katharine Hepburn or whoever they were, you knew you were seeing a similar character in a new variant. And that sort of made these actors iconic. It elevated them. It created a sort of magical illusion about a being. Of course, it was not real, and in some ways the characters grew into that role, became that sort of character in their own life. And I think this is something that we are really not going to see in any of the actors or musicians of our coming days. So it is really like the end of an era which is now going to an end. For someone like Carrie Fisher, the success was mostly a tragedy. I mean, we all know, or most of us know, that her ongoing, she was constantly had problems with drugs. She was gaining weight and trying to lose weight, and she wasn't successful by any means in the film or movie industry after her role as Princess Leia. And every time there was a Star Wars meeting or con or whatever the names are, and for some reason when Carrie Fisher was interviewed, I have to admit it was always a little bit awkward to listen to her. Like, I don't know, either she was extremely funny in a way that I did not understand, or sometimes I really had the feeling like she wasn't really right in her mind. I mean, I don't want to say something negative about Carrie Fisher because her death really hit me and really made me sad. But the reality is, as strange or as harsh as it may sound, in a way maybe it is better, because you see, the reality is, if you are a man, it's one of the few genuine advantages of being male. You can do some stuff until you die, or until the moment you die. You can sire children as a father until your body gives in. And just the same, you can act in movies or in TV series until you're very old. But the scope of roles for old women is really very limited. I mean, you can play grandmother roles or evil witch roles or I don't know what. But the scope of roles an old man can play in movies and TV series is really much wider, because it is, of course, in our society that we do have higher expectations on the physical appearance towards women. I mean, I'm really not a fan of this third wave feminism, and I criticize this for going way overboard, but in this direction it is just simply true that a woman who gets more round, gains weight, starts to look not so beautiful anymore in her age, has most certainly much greater difficulty to find any attractive and interesting roles than a male actor. I think at comparison, like Christopher Lee, who played Saruman the White, even when he was almost unable to leave the house, and so they came to him and filmed it in London where he lived. So that makes me think that she was quite sick, so it seemed, or so I heard, in the case of Carrie Fisher, that I think in such a case, maybe it is better if she dies before getting too old. I mean, can you imagine? I mean, we all want to live. We all want to live indefinitely. That is the nature of things. I wish nobody death. But trust me, my father died 1.5 years ago. He was 73 at the time. He had heavy Parkinson and had his third or fourth stroke. And I had wished my father would have lived to be 80, 90, 100. I loved him dearly. But when I heard he had died, I thought it was better, because the idea that he would have lived on, unable to do anything after his fourth stroke and his Parkinson, he wouldn't be able to do anything but lie in bed and being fed and cleaned by someone else, and it would be horrible, would have been horrible, especially for him. So there is a point where you think maybe it is for the better. I didn't know Carrie Fisher personally well enough to really say that about her, but from a fan perspective, maybe it was for the better. We remember her now still in a somewhat normal condition. As I said, it is not fair, but it is a reality that aging women have it and especially weight gaining women getting old have it indefinitely more hard to be accepted by people around them in the performing arts. Well, those are thoughts I wanted to get off my chest. There is nothing deeper behind it. It's just thinking as it goes. And from a cultural perspective, 2016 has really been devastating. But then, as we grow older, of course, more and more TV stars and movie stars and singing stars we knew are going to die. That is the nature of things. And for me, here, a lot of German TV stars and German singers I knew from my childhood in the 70s and 80s already are dead, simply because most TV actors at that era were considerably older than at the average now. And some of them are dead for, I don't know, 15 years, 20 years, or for quite some time. Whereas today in TV, most people acting in TV are considerably younger than people who were acting in TV in the 70s and 80s. Okay, before I'm going to ramble about an endless number of subjects, I hope you have a peaceful time between the holidays. Take the time to pause and reflect. I don't know if I would wish a Star Wars style greeting on Carrie Fisher. I don't know how she felt about that in the end, but I hope and pray that if something expects people in the afterlife, I hope for Mrs. Fisher it is something blissful and peaceful. Stay safe, my friends.